Hello, beautiful soul. I'm Aurora, and welcome to Twin Flame Journey, a space where we explore the deeper meaning behind soul connections, divine timing, and the path that leads two hearts back to union. If you've been feeling the signs, you're in the right place.
There is a kind of intimacy that does more than create closeness. It reveals. It reveals the tenderness beneath his control, the fear beneath his silence, the longing beneath his strength, the soul beneath the version of himself he has learned to show the world. And that is why sacred intimacy affects the divine masculine so deeply. Because when intimacy becomes sacred, he is no longer just feeling love. He is being revealed to himself. He is seeing what he hides, what he protects, what he has buried, and what he has secretly been longing to feel all along. So what does sacred intimacy actually reveal in the divine masculine? Why can one deep, honest connection shake him more than years of ordinary relationships? Why does he sometimes become quieter, softer, more distant, or more changed after being truly met? And why does what looks like confusion on the outside often hide a profound awakening on the inside? In this video, we'll explore what sacred intimacy reveals in the divine masculine, and why the deepest intimacy does not just connect him to another person, but to the hidden truth of his own soul. Chapter 1. Sacred intimacy is not ordinary closeness. There is a kind of intimacy that feels beautiful, and then there is a kind of intimacy that feels sacred. The difference between the two is deeper than romance, deeper than attraction, deeper even than emotional comfort. Ordinary closeness may warm the heart, calm loneliness, create affection, and make two people feel connected. But sacred intimacy does something far more powerful than that. It reveals. It reveals what is hidden, what is protected, what is unfinished, what is true. And that is why it affects the divine masculine so deeply. Because when intimacy becomes sacred, he is no longer simply sharing moments with another person. He is entering an experience that begins uncovering the truth of his own inner world. The connection stops being only relational and becomes revelatory. It stops being just about closeness between two people and starts becoming a mirror, a doorway, a confrontation with the self beneath the self he is used to showing. That is what makes sacred intimacy different. It is not only felt, it is lived as revelation. A man can experience many kinds of closeness in life without ever being truly undone by them. He can feel desire, affection, comfort, admiration, emotional warmth, and even love in ways that still allow him to stay largely inside the emotional identity he already knows. He can participate in relationships while keeping certain parts of himself protected. He can be present enough to connect, but not so present that the deepest layers of his soul are touched. Sacred intimacy changes that. Because sacred intimacy does not stop at what is easy to access. It does not stop at chemistry. It does not stop at attraction. It does not stop at feeling wanted. It does not stop at companionship. It goes further in. It reaches beneath the role, beneath the image, beneath the masculine self-control, beneath the old emotional structures that helped him survive. And once it reaches there, the whole inner experience changes. This is why one soul-level connection can affect the divine masculine more deeply than years of ordinary relationships ever did. Not because the ordinary relationships were meaningless, but because sacred intimacy touches a layer that ordinary closeness often never reaches. It touches essence. That word matters. Essence is who he is beneath adaptation, beneath performance, beneath the version of masculinity he learned to inhabit in order to be respected, desired, capable, and safe. Most men are seen in roles before they are seen in truth. They are seen as providers, protectors, leaders, calm ones, strong ones, stable ones, reliable ones, self-contained ones. Even when they are loved, they are often loved through the form they hold, not through the hidden emotional reality underneath it. They may be admired for how well they carry things, desired for their presence, respected for their discipline, needed for their steadiness. But sacred intimacy does not love him only through the role. It begins to sense the soul beneath it. And that is where the deeper experience begins. Because what sacred intimacy reveals first is not always comfort. Sometimes it reveals exposure. A man may not even realize how much of himself lives behind protection until he encounters someone whose presence reaches through those protections without forcing them. That is one of the most mysterious things about sacred intimacy. It does not always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it appears in a silence that feels too full to ignore. Sometimes in a conversation where he feels understood in ways he did not expect. Sometimes in the strange calm that comes when someone is present enough that he no longer feels the need to perform so much. At first, this may feel peaceful. But very quickly, it also begins to feel significant. Because now something inside him knows, this is not ordinary. This is not just comfort. Not just attraction. Not just a passing emotional bond. Something deeper is happening here. That deeper thing is revelation. Sacred intimacy reveals what he feels when he is no longer hiding as effectively from himself. That is why it can hit him harder than obvious passion ever could. Passion may excite the body. Sacred intimacy reaches the soul. Passion may make him want. Sacred intimacy makes him see. Passion may stir fantasy. Sacred intimacy dissolves it. And for the divine masculine, that can be profoundly unsettling. Because to be in sacred intimacy is not simply to feel close to another person. It is to feel close to the parts of himself that he has kept at a distance. It is to sense that his usual armor is no longer complete. It is to realize that the connection is not only asking him to enjoy something beautiful. It is asking him to encounter something true. That truth may be tenderness. It may be grief. It may be need. It may be longing. It may be the realization that beneath his strength is a heart that has wanted to be known more deeply than he ever let himself say. And once that truth begins rising, he cannot stay untouched. This is why sacred intimacy is not ordinary closeness. Ordinary closeness can coexist with distance from the self. Sacred intimacy cannot. Ordinary closeness may let him stay in familiar patterns. Sacred intimacy begins disrupting them. Ordinary closeness can be enjoyed without changing him very much. Sacred intimacy starts changing his internal landscape, whether he is ready or not. This does not mean sacred intimacy is always easy or gentle. In fact, one of the reasons it feels sacred is because it often carries weight. Not the weight of burden in a negative sense, but the weight of meaning. He begins to feel that this matters. That this touches something essential. That this is not a moment he can just casually categorize and move past. And that recognition can make him quieter. More reflective. More inward. Because sacred intimacy does not leave him in the same emotional position he was in before. It creates an aftershock. It follows him into silence, into thought, into memory, into the strange and humbling awareness that one person, one moment, one honest exchange, can reveal more about his soul than years of living from habit ever did. Think about what that means for a man who has spent much of life surviving through structure. He knows how to stay composed, how to stay functional, how to stay desirable without becoming too transparent, how to stay close enough to others without fully surrendering his interior life. Then sacred intimacy happens. Now the structure is under pressure, not because something is attacking him, because something is seeing him. And being seen at that level changes the emotional equation entirely. Now he cannot just ask, "Do I like this person?" Now the deeper question appears. What is this connection showing me about myself? That is the real threshold. The moment intimacy becomes sacred is the moment it stops being only about mutual feeling and starts becoming a mirror of truth. He begins to realize that what he feels in this connection is tied to what he has hidden, what he fears, what he longs for, and what kind of man he is becoming in response to it. This is why sacred intimacy often feels like more than love. It feels like awakening. Not always a polished awakening. Not always a graceful one. Not always one he knows how to embody immediately. But still awakening. Because sacred intimacy reveals where the soul has been sleeping beneath the role. It reveals where he has been strong but not yet free. Controlled but not yet whole. Admired but not yet deeply met. And once those revelations begin, the old life starts feeling different. Surface-level connection may feel emptier than before. Certain conversations may feel thinner. Old distractions may work less effectively. The emotional habits he relied on may begin to feel more like protection than peace. Why? Because sacred intimacy has altered the standard. It has shown him that there is more available than the life he was living from before. More truth, more depth, more realness, more emotional aliveness. That can be beautiful. It can also be painful. Because once a man knows what sacred intimacy feels like, he also begins to feel the cost of everything that is not sacred. The cost of emotional distance, the cost of performance, the cost of always being the role, the cost of staying defended from the very thing he most deeply longs for. This is the hidden force of sacred intimacy. It does not simply give him an experience. It reveals an absence of truth in old patterns, an absence of emotional rest in old defenses, an absence of soul in forms of connection that once seemed enough. And that absence starts speaking loudly once the deeper thing has been touched. That is why sacred intimacy is not ordinary closeness. It is not simply about being near someone. It is about being unable to remain far from yourself in their presence. It is about what happens when someone reaches the living self beneath your adaptations. It is about the collapse of emotional sleep. It is about the realization that the heart beneath the armor has not died, only waited. And perhaps that is the deepest truth of all. Sacred intimacy does not come into the divine masculine's life merely to comfort him. It comes to reveal him. It reveals the man beneath the mask, the soul beneath the role, the tenderness beneath the strength, the longing beneath the silence, the truth beneath the life he learned to manage. And once that revelation begins, he may resist it, question it, fear it, or grow quiet under its weight. But he cannot honestly say nothing happened. Something did happen. He was touched beneath the surface. He was met beneath the structure. He was shown, perhaps for the first time in a long time, that intimacy can be more than closeness. It can be sacred. And sacred intimacy never leaves the soul exactly as it found it. Chapter 2. It reveals the man beneath the mask. One of the first things sacred intimacy reveals in the divine masculine is the man beneath the mask. Not the role. Not the image. Not the polished version of himself he has learned to offer the world. The man underneath. And that is why it affects him so deeply. Because a man can spend years becoming very skilled at being seen without ever truly being known. He can build a life around what is functional, admirable, and emotionally manageable. He can become the strong one, the calm one, the stable one, the composed one, the one who carries, the one who endures, the one who figures things out. He can become fluent in reliability, self-control, presence, discipline, and silence. And over time, those things do not just become behaviors. They become identity. That identity is often what looks like the mask. Not fake in the shallow sense. Not false because it has no truth in it, but incomplete. It is the version of him that learned how to survive, how to be respected, how to remain emotionally organized, how to stay in control of what others can access, how to keep the deeper self protected. And for a long time, that mask may serve him well. It may make him admired, desired, trusted, needed. It may even make him feel safe. But sacred intimacy does something nothing else quite does. It sees past it. Not violently. Not invasively. Not by forcing him open. But by reaching him in a way that makes the mask less sufficient. That is when the deeper revelation begins. Because sacred intimacy does not fall in love only with his composure. It starts sensing the ache beneath the composure. It does not only admire his strength. It begins to feel the tenderness underneath the strength. It does not only respond to his calmness. It starts recognizing what the calmness may be containing. And once that happens, he begins to feel something very rare. I am being met beneath the version of myself I usually show. That can be beautiful. It can also be deeply disorienting. Because when a man is seen beneath the mask, he is no longer standing only in the familiar territory of image and role. He is standing in truth. And truth is far more vulnerable than presentation. This is why sacred intimacy can change his inner world so quickly. The mask may have taken years to build. built through experiences where emotional exposure did not feel safe, built through a culture that taught him to be strong before it taught him to be honest, built through moments where being composed earned more approval than being sensitive, built through pain he never fully named but still organized his life around. So when sacred intimacy begins revealing the man beneath that structure, it is not touching something casual. It is touching the hidden center of him, the part of him that gets tired, the part of him that longs, the part of him that still feels uncertainty, loneliness, grief, and need, the part of him that may secretly wonder whether anyone could love him without the performance of strength. And perhaps that is one of the most powerful truths of this chapter. What sacred intimacy reveals first is not only his depth. It reveals how much of that depth has been hidden. A man may not realize how much of himself he has tucked behind control until he meets someone who does not only respond to the control. He may not realize how often he lives through image until someone feels the sadness beneath the image. He may not realize how much of his masculinity has become a shield until sacred intimacy brings him into contact with the self that still aches underneath it. This is not weakness. This is revelation. And revelation can feel almost unbearable when it arrives after years of self-management. Think about how many men are rewarded for staying in the mask. The world often praises them for being unreadable in the right ways, for not being too emotional, for staying composed under pressure, for leading, fixing, producing, handling. Even in love, many men are taught that their value comes through what they provide or how strongly they hold form, not through the honesty of their emotional interior. So the mask becomes not only personal, it becomes social. It becomes part of how he belongs. That is why sacred intimacy can feel so disruptive, because it is not merely asking him to feel more. It is asking him to step out from behind what has helped him feel safe and valuable. And stepping out from behind that can feel like a kind of death. Not the death of the soul. The death of over-identification with the role. The death of the belief that he is only the strong one. Only the stable one. Only the controlled one. Only the one who carries and never needs carrying. Sacred intimacy shows him that there is much more to him than that. But first, it often reveals how tightly he is held onto the mask. This can happen in subtle ways. A single conversation where he feels understood too deeply. A moment where he notices he does not need to perform calmness because the other person is already meeting what is underneath it. A silence where he feels more seen than in 1,000 ordinary words. An emotional exchange that lingers in his system because it touched something he usually keeps outside of view. These moments may look small from the outside, but inside him, they can create enormous movement. Because now he is no longer only the man he has practiced being. Now he is the man he has hidden from himself. That is why sacred intimacy can make him quieter, more inward, more reflective. Not because nothing is happening, because too much is happening at once. He may begin feeling the difference between the mask and the man beneath it. The mask knows how to stay composed. The man beneath it knows how much he has been carrying. The mask knows how to keep things moving. The man beneath it may be deeply tired. The mask knows how to stay wanted. The man beneath it may be longing to be known. The mask knows how to remain in control. The man beneath it may be deeply affected by how little control he now feels. This inner contrast can be overwhelming. Because once a man becomes aware of the split between who he presents and who he actually is underneath, he cannot fully return to unconsciousness. He may still wear the mask, still rely on it, still retreat behind it when frightened. But something has shifted. He now knows it is there. He now knows there is another self beneath it, a softer self, a truer self, a more human self. That knowledge changes everything. Because sacred intimacy does not just say, I see you. It says, I see what you hide. And not in a shaming way. In a loving way. A steady way. A way that makes the hidden self feel both exposed and invited. That invitation is powerful. It tells him that maybe he does not have to remain only the role. Maybe he does not have to keep earning closeness through performance. Maybe the parts of him he has hidden are not the parts that make him unworthy. Maybe they are the parts most worthy of being met. But before that realization feels healing, it often feels destabilizing. Why? Because the mask is not only what hides him, it is also what has helped him function. So when sacred intimacy reveals the man beneath it, he may feel relief and grief at the same time. Relief that someone can see him beneath the surface. Grief that he has lived so long from the surface. Relief that he no longer has to hold the entire role alone. Grief for how much of himself he has kept exiled in order to maintain it. Relief that the hidden self is being touched. Grief for how long that self has gone unmet. This is why sacred intimacy is never just comforting. It is confronting in the holiest sense. It confronts the places where he has mistaken adaptation for essence. It confronts the places where control became a substitute for safety. It confronts the places where masculine structure became emotional hiding. It confronts the places where he has lived as the role so long that he forgot the soul beneath it. And that is exactly what makes it sacred. Because sacred intimacy is not interested in preserving illusion. It is interested in truth. Truth about who he is. Truth about what he feels. Truth about the parts of him that have remained hidden behind strength, usefulness, calmness, or control. Truth about how much love he has wanted beneath the discipline of not asking for it too openly. That truth can be hard to bear. But it is also the beginning of freedom. Because the mask may keep him protected, but it also keeps him limited. And once sacred intimacy reveals the man beneath the mask, he begins to sense that what protected him may also be what has separated him from the depth he most longs for. That realization can be painful. It can feel like losing an old self. But it can also feel like finally meeting the real self. The self who is not only composed, but tender. Not only strong, but longing. Not only dependable, but deeply in need of truth. Not only masculine in form, but human in soul. That is the deeper truth of Chapter 2. Sacred intimacy reveals the man beneath the mask. It exposes the self that has lived underneath role, image, strength, control, and emotional performance. It shows him how much of his identity has been built around protection. It reveals the hidden tenderness, hidden ache, hidden hunger to be known that ordinary closeness often never reaches. And once that man is revealed, even briefly, he can never fully believe the mask is all he is again. He may resist that revelation. He may fear it. He may grow quiet beneath it. But he has now seen something sacred. There is more of him here than the world usually gets. And once that truth has been touched, the journey inward has already begun. Chapter 3. It reveals how deeply he wants to be known. One of the most surprising things sacred intimacy reveals in the divine masculine is this. Beneath all the control, beneath the strength, beneath the calmness, beneath the masculine discipline he has learned to live inside, there is often a very deep desire to be known. Not admired only. Not desired only. Not respected only. Known. And for many men, that longing is far deeper than they ever admit. Sometimes deeper than they consciously realize. Because a man can spend years building a life around being seen in functional ways, while quietly starving for something more intimate. He may be seen for what he provides, what he achieves, what he solves, how stable he appears, how much he can handle, how calm he remains, how strong he looks when life is heavy. All of these things can make him valuable in the eyes of the world. They can even make him lovable in the eyes of others. But they do not always make him known. And this is where sacred intimacy becomes so powerful. Because sacred intimacy begins revealing that underneath his masculine structure, there is not only a desire to stay in control. There is also a desire to be understood without having to keep performing control all the time. That desire is holy. And it can shake him deeply when it comes into view. A lot of men are taught, directly or indirectly, to hunger for respect more than tenderness, to seek admiration more than emotional recognition, to become impressive rather than transparent. They learn that being needed is safer than being vulnerable, that being desired is easier than being emotionally understood, that being strong is more acceptable than being deeply affected. Over time, these lessons shape the inner life. So the longing to be known does not disappear. It goes underground. It becomes quieter, more hidden, more protected. Sometimes it disguises itself as emotional independence. Sometimes as stoicism. Sometimes as silence. Sometimes as the insistence that he does not need much. But sacred intimacy has a way of exposing what has gone underground. Because when someone begins to meet him beneath the role, beneath the competence, beneath the carefully maintained masculine identity, something in him wakes up. Not only fear. Not only tenderness. Longing. The longing to finally stop being seen only through what he does. The longing to stop being loved only through what he can maintain. The longing to be emotionally recognized in the places he usually keeps out of view. That is why this chapter matters so much. Because one of the deepest revelations of sacred intimacy is that the divine masculine does not only want closeness in the abstract. He wants to be met in truth. He wants someone to sense the life beneath the armor. He wants to feel that he does not have to remain only the role in order to be received. He wants, perhaps more than he ever says, the experience of not being emotionally alone inside himself. And when that desire is touched, it can hit him with enormous force. At first, he may not understand what he is feeling. He may only notice that certain moments affect him more than they should. A conversation that stays with him. A silence in which he feels unusually understood. A moment where someone responds not just to his words, but to the emotion underneath them. A moment where he realizes he does not have to explain everything to feel emotionally met. That kind of moment can go far deeper than romance. Because what it awakens is not just affection. It awakens the hidden hunger to be known. And once that hunger is touched, he can no longer pretend it is not there. This can be disorienting for him. Because many men are much more practiced at hiding that hunger than honoring it. They know how to want through attraction. They know how to move toward desire. They know how to stay engaged through chemistry, attention, or longing. But wanting to be known is different. It is quieter. It is more vulnerable. It asks more of the soul. It makes him more emotionally naked. To want to be known means he is no longer satisfied with being admired from a distance. To want to be known means he is no longer content with only appearing strong. To want to be known means he is allowing himself to feel that the hidden self matters too. That can feel both beautiful and terrifying. Beautiful, because some part of him has always wanted it. Terrifying, because being known means being seen beyond protection. And what lives beyond protection is rarely simple. There may be tenderness there, but also grief, longing, fear, uncertainty, old pain, the ache of having gone unseen in important ways for a very long time. That is why sacred intimacy does not just reveal a beautiful masculine desire to be deeply met. It also reveals how long that desire has been buried. And that realization can be heartbreaking. Imagine a man who has spent years becoming what life rewarded. Strong, functional, calm, capable, useful, reliable. He knows how to be the one others lean on. He knows how to maintain structure. He knows how to stay composed even when inwardly something hurts. He may even have built an entire identity around being the man who does not need too much from anyone. Then sacred intimacy enters. And suddenly, he feels something that cuts beneath all of that. I want to be known here. Not just appreciated. Not just desired. Not just trusted. Known. Known in my softness. Known in my tiredness. Known in my silence. Known in the part of me that is not always okay. Known in the part of me that has carried more than anyone sees. This can be one of the most emotional awakenings of all. Because once that longing surfaces, it changes the whole meaning of intimacy for him. Now, intimacy is not only about closeness. It is about recognition. Now, it is not only about feeling good in the moment. It is about whether the hidden self is being reached. Now, it is not only about whether there is connection. It is about whether the connection can see through the form and remain present with the truth underneath. That is sacred, and it can make ordinary connection feel strangely empty afterward. Because once a man has tasted the possibility of being truly known, surface-level affection may stop satisfying him in the same way. He may still participate in it, still respond to it, still move through old patterns for a while. But something inside him now knows the difference. It knows the difference between being desired and being understood, between being admired and being emotionally received, between being loved for the role and being met in the reality beneath the role. That knowing is irreversible. It begins changing him quietly. He may become more inward, more reflective, more aware of how lonely performance can be, more aware that what he has wanted from love may be deeper than he admitted. This is one of the hidden reasons sacred intimacy can feel so overwhelming to the divine masculine, because it reveals that the part of him that hides the most may also be the part longing most intensely to be seen. That is a difficult truth to carry, because if the most hidden part of him wants to be known, then the armor is no longer only protection. It is also deprivation. It is keeping him safe, yes, but it is also keeping him unseen. And sacred intimacy makes him feel the cost of that. He may start realizing how much of his life has been spent being partially met, partially loved, partially understood. Not because no one cared, but because very few people reached deep enough to touch the inner man beneath the masculine presentation. And now that someone has, the old emotional compromises begin to ache. He may begin to feel that he has lived too long in partial visibility. Too long being respected without being fully known. Too long being strong without being emotionally held. Too long giving the outer self while the inner self remained mostly hidden. This can bring tenderness. It can also bring grief. Grief for the younger self who learned to hide what hurt. Grief for the versions of him that felt they had to remain composed to remain worthy. Grief for the quiet ache of wanting to be known while pretending not to need it. And this grief, though painful, is sacred too, because it means something true is finally being felt. Not just the longing for a person, the longing for real recognition. That is what sacred intimacy reveals in the divine masculine. It reveals that beneath his strength, there is often a soul that has been hungry for emotional recognition for far longer than anyone realized. A soul that wants someone to feel the meaning beneath the silence, to notice the ache beneath the calm, to remain present with the hidden self without trying to shame it, fix it, or overpower it. To simply know it. That longing changes the whole inner journey. Because once a man admits, even quietly, that he wants to be known, he can no longer fully worship the old masculine ideal of invulnerability. Now he knows there is something deeper than image, deeper than respect, deeper than control. He knows there is a part of him still waiting to be met as he really is. And that part, once awakened, begins changing him from within. He may still fear the exposure, still resist at times, still retreat when it feels too real. But beneath all of that, the longing remains. The longing to stop being only the mask. The longing to stop being loved only for what he can maintain. The longing to rest in truth. That is the deeper truth of Chapter 3. Sacred intimacy reveals how deeply he wants to be known. It exposes the hidden hunger beneath masculine composure, the longing to be emotionally recognized, not just admired, understood, not just desired, met in tenderness, not just respected in strength. It shows him that the part of him most protected is often the part most desperate to be seen. And once that longing comes into the light, he can no longer fully pretend that surface-level connection is enough for his soul. That is why sacred intimacy hits so deeply. Because it does not only reveal what he fears, it reveals what he has always wanted. Chapter 4. It reveals the wounds he still carries. Sacred intimacy does not only reveal beauty in the divine masculine, it also reveals pain. That is one of the hardest truths to understand, and one of the most important. Because when people speak about deep, sacred, soul-level intimacy, they often speak only about awakening, recognition, tenderness, love, and transformation. They speak as if intimacy simply uncovers the highest self, as if being deeply met automatically creates clarity, healing, and peace. But sacred intimacy is not that simple. It does not only reveal the light in him, it reveals the wounds he still carries. And that is why it can hit him so hard. Because when intimacy becomes sacred, it no longer touches only the part of him that longs for love. It also touches the part of him that learned to fear it. That is the paradox. The same connection that feels like home may also activate every place in him that has learned that home is unstable. The same emotional safety that softens him may also awaken panic. The same person who makes him feel seen may also make him feel exposed. The same closeness he has always wanted may stir the hidden pain that once taught him closeness could hurt. This is why sacred intimacy is never merely comforting. It is revealing. It reveals not only how deeply he can love, but how deeply he has been wounded around love. A man may not even realize how much pain still lives beneath his control until someone gets close. Enough to touch the places he usually keeps protected. That is often what sacred intimacy does first. It brings hidden emotional material to the surface. Not to punish him, not to shame him, but because intimacy that reaches the soul will inevitably touch whatever the soul has not yet fully healed. And often, what has not been healed is exactly what he has organized his life around avoiding. This is where many people misunderstand the divine masculine. They see him react strongly to intimacy and assume the intimacy itself is the problem. But often, the deeper truth is that intimacy is not creating the wound. It is exposing it. It is showing him what has always been there underneath the armor. That is why one soul-deep connection can affect him more than years of ordinary relationships. Ordinary relationships may never reach the layer where the wound lives. Sacred intimacy does. It reaches the abandoned places, the scared places, the ashamed places, the lonely places. The parts of him that still brace for pain even when love is present. And once those parts are touched, he cannot remain emotionally neutral. This is why the experience can feel so overwhelming. Because he may not only be feeling the beauty of being met, he may also be feeling the return of everything in him that once got hurt when he tried to be open. One of the first wounds sacred intimacy often reveals is the fear of abandonment. This wound can live in a man long before he ever has language for it. It may have formed in childhood, in emotional neglect, in past love, in subtle experiences of being unseen, left alone, or made to feel that emotional need was too much. He may not consciously walk around saying, "I am afraid of abandonment." In fact, many men who carry this wound look independent, self-contained, and highly controlled. But sacred intimacy has a way of making this fear visible. Because the moment someone begins to matter deeply, the old question rises. What happens if I open and then lose this? What happens if I let this reach me and it disappears? What happens if I soften here, and then I am left in that softness alone? This fear can be incredibly destabilizing. Not because the present connection is unsafe, but because the wound does not live only in the present. It lives in emotional memory. It lives in the nervous system. It lives in the part of him that still expects deep connection to be followed by loss. And so even as he feels love, another part of him may begin bracing for absence. That is one of the deepest contradictions sacred intimacy can reveal. The more he cares, the more vulnerable he becomes to the fear of losing what he now cares about. Another wound sacred intimacy often reveals is the fear of not being enough. This wound can be almost invisible on the surface because many men build lives that look highly competent. They become successful, dependable, capable, self-disciplined, useful. They know how to carry responsibility. They know how to look strong. They know how to stay functional. And all of that can hide a much quieter pain. What if I am not enough where it really matters? Not enough emotionally. Not enough spiritually. Not enough to hold this depth. Not enough to live up to what she sees in me. Not enough to sustain sacred love without disappointing it. This fear can make intimacy feel heavy. Not because love is unwanted, but because the man may feel himself standing in front of something meaningful and wondering whether he is truly able to meet it. He may ask, even without words, what if she sees the deeper me and finds me lacking? What if I fail this connection? What if I am strong in the world, but unfinished in the heart? That kind of wound can make him pull back not because he feels too little, but because he feels the pressure of not wanting to fail something that matters. Sacred intimacy also reveals the fear of dependence. This is a powerful one. Many men learn to equate strength with self-sufficiency. To need too much feels unsafe. To rely emotionally on someone can feel like giving away control. So when sacred intimacy begins creating deep emotional comfort, the hidden self may love it while the protective self becomes alarmed. Because now he is no longer simply enjoying someone. He is being affected by them. Their presence changes his inner state. Their absence might matter. Their energy begins touching his emotional equilibrium. And that can awaken a painful fear. What if I begin needing this? What if I become dependent on a piece I cannot control? What if this person starts mattering more than I know how to handle? For a man built around control, this can feel dangerous. Not because emotional need is inherently dangerous, but because he may have spent years trying to keep his needs small enough to manage. Sacred intimacy makes those needs visible again. It reminds him that beneath the performance of self-containment, there is still a human being who longs for contact, recognition, safety, and emotional rest. That revelation can feel beautiful. It can also make him panic. Then there is the wound of emotional exposure. This wound is often one of the deepest because it touches shame directly. A man may not fear love in the abstract. He may fear being seen too clearly in love. He may fear what happens when someone recognizes the sadness beneath the strength, the uncertainty beneath the calm, the tenderness beneath the control. If he has spent years hiding those parts of himself, then sacred intimacy can feel like standing emotionally naked in front of someone while still hoping to be respected. That is vulnerable in the most profound sense. Because now he is no longer only offering the polished self. He is being encountered in his unfinished humanity. And if he has ever been shamed, dismissed, misunderstood, or abandoned in that state before, then sacred intimacy will almost certainly awaken that memory. Again, not always in thoughts. Sometimes in behavior. In retreat. In silence. In confusion. In the sudden urge to regain distance after closeness. These reactions are often the external shape of inner wounds being touched. This is why sacred intimacy can reveal so much pain at once. Not because it is wrong, but because it reaches where the pain lives. Think about the deeper meaning of that. A man may have lived for years with wounds hidden beneath function. As long as nothing reaches deep enough, those wounds remain dormant. They still shape him, but quietly. They influence how he loves, how he protects himself, how close he lets people come, how quickly he withdraws when things get too real. But they do not have to fully surface. Then sacred intimacy arrives. Now the distance is gone. Now the self beneath the armor is being touched. Now the old pain has nowhere to stay hidden in the same way. And so it rises. This is why sacred intimacy often looks messy before it looks holy. Because revelation is not always gentle. It may reveal his fear and his longing at the same time. His tenderness and his defenses at the same time. His hunger for truth and his terror of exposure at the same time. And all of that can make him seem conflicted, inconsistent, inward, or emotionally overwhelmed. But underneath that conflict is something very real. He is being shown the wounds he still carries. That matters because wounds that remain buried continue ruling the inner life. Wounds that are revealed, though painful, at least become visible. Sacred intimacy becomes a kind of holy mirror, showing him not only who he could be, but what still blocks him from fully living as that man. This is why sacred intimacy is so transformative. Not because it immediately heals everything, but because it tells the truth. It tells the truth about what still hurts, about what still fears closeness, about what still expects loss, about what still feels unworthy of deep love, about what still believes that needing, softening, or being seen too clearly could become dangerous. And truth, even painful truth, is where real healing begins. That is the deeper truth of Chapter 4. Sacred intimacy reveals the wounds he still carries. It shows him the fears, insecurities, and emotional memories hidden beneath his strength. It reveals fear of abandonment, fear of not being enough, fear of dependence, fear of exposure, and every old ache that still shapes how he receives love. It does not create these wounds. It makes them visible. And once they are visible, the divine masculine is no longer only standing in the beauty of connection. He is standing in the holy confrontation with everything in him that still needs to heal. That is why sacred intimacy can shake him so deeply. because it does not only reveal the soul. It reveals what the soul has been carrying in silence. Chapter 5. It reveals the cost of the armor. One of the deepest things sacred intimacy reveals in the divine masculine is not just that he has armor. It reveals what that armor has cost him. And that realization can be one of the most painful awakenings of all. Because armor does not only protect, it also separates. It separates him from feeling too much, from needing too much, from showing too much, from being hurt too easily, from being seen in ways that leave him exposed. But over time, it also separates him from love, from truth, from emotional rest, from the deeper life of his own soul. That is why sacred intimacy can hit him with such force. Because once someone reaches beneath the armor, he begins to feel not only what the armor protected him from, but also what it kept him from. That is the cost. A man may spend years believing his armor is simply part of who he is. He may call it strength, maturity, self-control, stability, independence, masculine discipline, and some of it may genuinely contain strength. But sacred intimacy begins to show him that some of what he thought was strength was also defense. Some of what he thought was peace was also distance. Some of what he thought was calm was also suppression. Some of what he thought was independence was also emotional isolation. Some of what he thought was control was also fear. This is not easy to face, because the armor may have helped him survive. Maybe it helped him endure pain without collapsing. Maybe it helped him stay functional when nobody was coming to help. Maybe it helped him earn respect in a world that rewarded composure more than tenderness. Maybe it helped him protect the younger, softer parts of himself that once got hurt too easily. So the armor is not meaningless. It is sacred in its own way. It was built for a reason. But sacred intimacy reveals that what once protected him may now be depriving him. That is the deeper shock. What if the thing that kept me safe is now keeping me separate? What if the thing that helped me survive is now stopping me from being fully alive? What if the version of strength I trusted most is also the reason I remain emotionally alone? These are not small questions. They are soul questions. And sacred intimacy is often what forces them into the light. Before sacred intimacy, the armor may feel natural, normal, invisible even. A man may not realize how defended he is because the defenses have become part of the structure of daily life. He knows how to stay composed, how to give enough but not too much, how to be emotionally present without becoming fully transparent, how to remain desirable without becoming deeply vulnerable, how to be the strong one while quietly keeping the deeper self protected. This can work for a long time, until sacred intimacy happens. Now something changes. Now he feels what it is like to be met beneath the structure, to be emotionally seen beyond performance, to be safe enough to soften, to be known in the places he usually hides, to feel tenderness without immediately translating it into control. And once he feels that, the old armor starts feeling heavier. That is one of the first signs that sacred intimacy is revealing the cost. What once felt like safety now begins to feel like effort. What once felt like protection now begins to feel like loneliness. What once felt like masculine steadiness now begins to feel like emotional exhaustion. Because now he knows what it feels like not to carry the armor quite so tightly. And that contrast changes everything. A man can tolerate almost any pattern if he has never felt an alternative. But once he experiences real emotional truth, real soul contact, real sacred closeness, he can no longer wear the armor with the same innocence. Now he feels the difference. The difference between appearing strong and feeling whole. Between being respected and being known. Between being in control and being at peace. Between surviving intimacy and actually living inside it. That difference is painful, because it exposes the hidden loneliness beneath the armor. And loneliness beneath armor is one of the quietest pains a man can carry. From the outside, he may look fine, strong, steady, capable, reliable, unmoved. But sacred intimacy reveals the inner reality that outward strength can coexist with deep emotional exile. A man can be admired by many and still feel unknown. He can be depended on and still feel untouched. He can be wanted and still feel that no one has really reached the life underneath the masculine role. That is the cost of the armor. It may preserve dignity, but it can starve intimacy. It may prevent certain kinds of hurt, but it can also prevent certain kinds of healing. It may keep him from being shattered, but it can also keep him from being fully seen. And once sacred intimacy lets him feel what it is like to be seen, even briefly, the loneliness of the old way begins to ache. That ache is sacred too, because it tells the truth. It tells him that the armor has not only hidden his wounds, it has hidden his longing, the longing to rest, to stop performing, to stop carrying the whole identity alone, to stop being the strong one every second, to let someone touch the soul beneath the structure. This longing may have always been there, but armor turns longing into silence. Sacred intimacy turns silence into awareness. Now he starts feeling the cost more clearly. He may realize how much energy it takes to stay guarded, how often he edits himself emotionally, how quickly he shuts down when something feels too real, how often he turns tenderness into distance because he does not know how else to stay safe. He may begin to see that the armor is not neutral. It is expensive, emotionally expensive, spiritually expensive, relationally expensive. It costs him spontaneity. It costs him softness. It costs him the ease of being emotionally real. It costs him the chance to be fully met. And perhaps most painfully of all, it costs him the life that might have been possible if he had not needed to protect so much for so long. That realization can bring grief. Deep grief. Not only for love lost or connections missed, but for the self he has had to keep hidden. For the years spent living from defense instead of essence. For the tenderness that went underground. For the emotional truth that remained unspoken because the armor felt more necessary than honesty. This grief may not look dramatic. It may look like heaviness, quietness, reflection, a strange sadness, a sense that the old life no longer fits as comfortably as before. This is what sacred intimacy often does. It does not simply show him beauty. It shows him the price he has paid to avoid being hurt. And once he sees that price, the armor can no longer feel purely protective. Now it feels limiting too. That is a painful stage, because he may not yet know how to live without the armor. This matters. Sacred intimacy may reveal the cost of the armor long before he knows how to set it down. So he can end up in an in-between place, aware enough to feel the burden, but not yet embodied enough to live fully without it. He may feel how heavy the defenses are, but still cling to them when frightened. He may hate the distance they create, but still retreat into that distance because it is what his nervous system trusts. This is why the process can look contradictory. He may long for closeness and still protect himself from it. He may feel the loneliness of the armor and still wear it. He may know the old way is costly and still not know what comes next. That contradiction is not proof that the revelation is false. It is proof that sacred intimacy has made the old strategy visible before the new self is fully formed. And that visibility matters. Because once a man has truly felt the cost of his armor, he can no longer fully romanticize it. He can no longer call all distance wisdom. He can no longer confuse all restraint with maturity. He can no longer believe that being untouched is the same as being strong. Now he knows something deeper. He knows that armor may keep him protected, but it also keeps him hungry. Hungry for truth. Hungry for emotional rest. Hungry for real intimacy. Hungry for a life where he no longer has to survive love by remaining partially hidden. That hunger is holy, because it means the soul is beginning to outgrow defense. It means the old structures are no longer enough. It means a deeper masculinity is trying to emerge. A masculinity that is not only built on control, but on consciousness. Not only on strength, but on truth. Not only on carrying, but on allowing himself to be met. That is why sacred intimacy reveals the cost of the armor. Not to shame him for having it, but to show him that what once protected his heart may now be preventing it from fully living. That is the deeper truth of Chapter 5. Sacred intimacy reveals the cost of the armor by showing the divine masculine how much his self-protection has asked him to sacrifice. It reveals the loneliness beneath control, the exhaustion beneath composure, the hunger beneath emotional restraint, and the separation beneath the version of strength he has trusted for years. It shows him that armor is not only a shield, it is also a barrier, and once he feels the cost of that barrier, he can no longer fully believe that surviving behind it is enough. He may still wear it for a while, still need it, still return to it when afraid. But something in him now knows. The armor kept me safe, but it also kept me far from the love, truth, and aliveness my soul has been longing for all along. Chapter 6. It reveals the split between love and fear. One of the deepest things sacred intimacy reveals in the divine masculine is not just love. It reveals the split between the part of him that wants closeness and the part of him that still fears it. The part that longs to stay and the part that wants to run. The part that recognizes something holy and the part that reacts as if holiness is dangerous. And this is where the masculine journey becomes profoundly human. Because people often imagine that once a man feels something real, he should become clear, softer, more expressive, more certain. They assume that sacred intimacy should naturally create visible devotion. That if the connection is deep enough, fear should disappear and love should simply take over. But that is not usually how this works. Sacred intimacy does not erase fear. It reveals how much fear has been living alongside love all along. That is why this chapter matters. Because the divine masculine may not be confused about whether he feels something. He may be torn because he feels two opposite truths at once. And both are real. One truth says, "This is what I have always wanted." The other says, "This is exactly what could undo me." One truth says, "Move closer." The other says, "Protect yourself now." One truth feels peace. The other feels danger. This is the split between love and fear. And sacred intimacy brings that split into the light. Before sacred intimacy, a man may be able to live inside emotional patterns without fully noticing how divided he is. He may think he simply likes space, prefers calm, needs control, moves slowly, keeps things measured, stays practical, stays composed. But once intimacy becomes sacred, the deeper contradiction starts showing itself. Now he notices that part of him craves truth, while another part is still built around defense. Now he notices that he wants to be known, but being known makes him feel exposed. Now he notices that closeness nourishes him, but also activates fear. Now he notices that the very thing that feels like home can also make him feel emotionally unsafe. That is what sacred intimacy reveals. Not that he does not love, but that love alone is not the only force moving in him. Fear is moving too. And fear can be ancient, older than this relationship, older than this moment, older than the language he has for it. It may come from the past, from childhood, from previous heartbreak, from emotional neglect, from having to become strong too early, from learning that need was dangerous, from learning that openness could become pain, from learning that being deeply affected made him vulnerable in ways the world did not know how to hold. So now, when sacred intimacy reaches him, it touches two systems at once: the awakened heart and the protective self. The awakened heart recognizes beauty. It feels tenderness, gratitude, peace, longing, relief, the strange comfort of being emotionally met. But the protective self reacts differently. It feels exposure, risk, dependence, loss of control, the possibility of being hurt where he is softest. This is why sacred intimacy can make him feel divided in a way ordinary connection never did. Ordinary connection may not reach deep enough to activate the split fully. But sacred intimacy does. It reaches the layer where desire and defense live side by side. And once that happens, his behavior may start looking contradictory. He may move closer, then pull away. He may become more open, then suddenly quieter. He may feel deep affection, then become hard to read. He may seem softened inwardly, but more guarded outwardly. He may think of the connection constantly while acting as if he needs distance. This is not always because he is false. Often, it is because the split has become unbearable. Imagine what this feels like from the inside. He feels a real connection. Not imagined. Not superficial. Something in him recognizes the truth of it. But that truth is not arriving in an empty emotional field. It is arriving in a man whose nervous system may still associate closeness with vulnerability. Vulnerability with loss of control, and loss of control with danger. So now he lives in a tension he may not know how to explain. He feels the call toward intimacy, and the reflex toward self-protection. He feels trust rising, and fear rising with it. He feels the desire to surrender to what is real, and the instinct to escape before it becomes too important. That is exhausting, because division is exhausting. A man can carry many things, but carrying opposing inner truths at the same time creates a very particular kind of pain. He is no longer simply deciding what he wants. He is trying to survive what he wants. He is trying to figure out whether love is something he can actually live inside, or whether it will expose too much of what he has spent years trying to contain. This is why sacred intimacy can make him go silent. Silence is sometimes where the split goes when he cannot reconcile it. Not because he has no feelings, but because he has too many feelings moving in opposite directions. And each one feels urgent. Love says stay. Fear says go. Love says open. Fear says hide. Love says this matters. Fear says that is exactly the problem. That is the inner war sacred intimacy reveals. And this war can make him look inconsistent from the outside. But inconsistency is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is evidence of inner conflict. This does not excuse harmful behavior. It does not romanticize avoidance. It does not mean the other person should simply endure confusion forever. But if we are trying to understand what sacred intimacy reveals in the divine masculine, we have to understand that it often reveals the fracture line between what his soul wants and what his wounds permit. That fracture line is where much of his struggle lives. Because the soul may be ready before the old defenses are. The heart may recognize something true before the nervous system knows how to stay calm inside that truth. The deeper self may want connection while the protective self still believes that connection leads to pain. This is why he may look like two different men at times. One man is soft, open, present, deeply moved. The other is distant, cautious, guarded, hard to reach. Both may be real in that moment. Not because he is playing games, but because sacred intimacy has exposed the split between who he is becoming and who he has had to be in order to survive. This is one of the most painful revelations of all. Because once he sees the split, he cannot fully pretend he is whole. Now he feels the internal contradiction. He feels that some part of him is still living by fear, still deciding by fear, still protecting itself from the very thing it most longs for. And that awareness can bring grief. Grief that love is not simple for him. Grief that being touched deeply also means being triggered deeply. Grief that the old self does not know how to relax into what the soul recognizes. Grief that he may still hurt what he loves because the fear is not yet integrated. This grief is sacred too, because it means he is beginning to see clearly. He is beginning to understand that his issue is not only whether love exists. It is whether he can remain present when love becomes real. That is a different question, and it leads to a deeper kind of growth. Because sacred intimacy does not only reveal the split, it also reveals that the split cannot remain forever without consequence. He cannot keep saying yes in his soul and no in his behavior without feeling the pain of that contradiction. He cannot keep longing for depth while obeying defenses built for distance without feeling the deadness of that compromise. He cannot keep calling fear wisdom once sacred intimacy has shown him how much fear is costing him. This is where the revelation becomes an initiation. Now he must begin to choose. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But consciously. Will he keep living from the protective self alone? Or will he begin to build the inner capacity to let love and safety coexist? Will he continue retreating every time something matters? Or will he start facing the fears that make closeness feel dangerous? Will he keep protecting the wound? Or will he begin honoring the awakened heart? These are sacred questions because they move him from reaction into responsibility. And responsibility is what eventually heals the split. Not pressure. Not fantasy. Not someone else carrying his inner work for him. He heals the split by becoming more honest about it. By admitting that both love and fear are present. By seeing how fear shapes his choices. By noticing that what feels like self-protection may now also be self-separation. By learning that sacred intimacy is not here to punish him for his wounds, but to reveal them so he can stop living under their rule. That is the deeper truth of Chapter 6. Sacred intimacy reveals the split between love and fear. It shows the divine masculine that the part of him awakened by truth is often standing face to face, with the part of him still organized around protection. One part longs to stay close, to soften, to trust, to be known. Another part still reacts to closeness as if it is danger. This split creates silence, hesitation, contradiction, and inward overwhelm. But it also reveals exactly where his growth must happen. Because once the split is visible, he can no longer fully pretend that distance is just personality. He begins to see that fear has been shaping his love. And that realization, though painful, is the beginning of becoming whole. Sacred intimacy does not create the fracture. It illuminates it. And what is illuminated can eventually be healed. That is why this stage matters so much. Because the moment he feels both love and fear at once is not only the moment of his deepest conflict. It may also be the moment of his deepest awakening. Chapter 7. It reveals that he cannot go back unchanged. One of the deepest things sacred intimacy reveals in the divine masculine is this. He cannot go back unchanged. Not fully. Not honestly. Not in the way he lived before. That is one of the quietest truths in this journey, but also one of the most powerful. Because sacred intimacy does not only create a meaningful moment, it creates an internal aftershock. It touches something so deep that even if he says little, even if he withdraws, even if he delays, even if he tries to return to normal, something in him already knows that normal no longer feels the same. That is the revelation. Sacred intimacy does not just give him feelings. It alters what those feelings mean. Before this kind of intimacy, a man may live inside certain structures without questioning them too much. He may know how to move through attraction, through connection, through life itself in ways that keep him relatively organized. He knows how to function, how to maintain control, how to stay composed, how to give enough to remain involved without becoming fully revealed. He may even believe this is simply who he is. But once sacred intimacy reaches him, something changes in the foundation. Now he knows what it feels like to be seen beneath the mask, to be emotionally met beneath the role, to feel safety without performance, to feel the wounds rise with the love, to feel the hidden self come closer to the surface, to feel the split between fear and longing become impossible to ignore. And once he has felt all of that, he cannot fully go back to being the same man inside. That is why sacred intimacy often makes him more inward, more reflective, more serious, more emotionally aware than he was before. Not necessarily because he wants to become more complicated, but because complexity has already entered him. He may try to return to old rhythms, old distractions, old routines, old versions of connection that once felt sufficient. But something inside him has already changed its standard. Now certain conversations feel emptier than before. Certain dynamics feel flatter. Certain roles feel more tiring. Certain habits that once helped him stay emotionally asleep no longer work with the same ease. Why? Because sacred intimacy has shown him another level of reality. And once a man has touched that level, surface becomes harder to inhabit without feeling the contrast. That contrast is where the change begins living. He may not say it aloud, but inwardly he feels it. He feels that old ways of relating no longer satisfy him in the same innocent way. He feels that emotional distance no longer feels as peaceful as it once did. He feels that the life he built around composure may also have kept him from something more alive. He feels that he cannot unknow what the connection revealed about him. This is one of the most sacred and painful stages of the masculine journey. Because now he is no longer only dealing with a relationship. He is dealing with the fact that something in him has awakened beyond the life he was used to living. An awakening changes appetite. He may begin hungering for more truth, more depth, more congruence, more emotional honesty, more connection that feels real rather than merely functional. This does not mean he immediately knows how to live differently. That is important. Sacred intimacy may change his inner world before it changes his outer behavior. That is why so many people misunderstand this stage. They look for external proof, for clear words, clear choices, clear action, and sometimes those things come later. But first, the change often happens in silence. Inwardly, he starts noticing himself, noticing how quickly he retreats when something matters, noticing how much effort it takes to remain emotionally controlled, noticing how often he has called distance peace, noticing how much of his masculinity has been built around not being too affected, noticing that he is, in fact, deeply affected. That awareness cannot be undone. Once he sees it, he cannot unsee it. That is why sacred intimacy is so powerful. It reveals not only what he feels for another person, it reveals the emotional life he has been living with himself. And if that life has been partial, defended, restrained, over-controlled, or emotionally divided, then the revelation can be enormous. Because now he must live with the knowledge that there is more of him here than he has been allowing. More tenderness, more need, more truth, more longing, more possibility. And once that possibility is awakened, the old identity begins to feel too small. This is why sacred intimacy can make ordinary connection feel strangely empty afterward. Not because he has become impossible to satisfy, but because he has felt the difference between being near someone and being truly met. He has felt the difference between affection and truth, between attraction and revelation, between comfort and sacred contact. That difference stays with him. It follows him into solitude, into reflection, into the parts of life where he starts realizing that certain things no longer nourish him the way they once did. This can feel like loss, and in a way it is. He may be losing the simplicity of unconsciousness, losing the comfort of old emotional habits, losing the certainty of the role he once trusted, losing the version of himself who could stay half-hidden without feeling the cost. That loss can create grief. Quiet grief. Not always dramatic. Sometimes it appears as tiredness, as silence, as a sense of emotional heaviness, as a strange inability to fully enjoy what once distracted him, as a growing awareness that he has changed inside, but does not yet know what to do with the change. This is where sacred intimacy becomes more than beautiful. It becomes irreversible. Not because it guarantees outcome. Not because it guarantees union, clarity, or immediate healing. But because once the soul has been touched at that depth, the man cannot honestly return to the exact same emotional sleep. He may try. He may return to routine, to work, to distance, to the old language of I'm fine, to the old masculine reflex of controlling what he can. But something in him knows too much now. He knows what it felt like to be reached. He knows what it felt like to soften. He knows what it felt like when someone saw the hidden self and did not turn away. He knows what it felt like when the armor stopped being enough. That knowing is permanent. And that is why sacred intimacy changes him, even when the outer story remains unfinished. The change is not always in what he does first. It is in what he can no longer deny. He can no longer deny that he wants more truth than before. He can no longer deny that he is more emotionally alive than the old role allowed. He can no longer deny that some version of himself is now being called forward. A deeper version. A more conscious one. A more honest one. A more integrated masculinity that cannot live comfortably inside half-truth forever. This is where the journey becomes sacred in the truest sense. Because now he is not only being shown what hurts, he is being shown what is possible. And possibility can be just as disruptive as pain. To glimpse the man he could become is a beautiful thing. It is also unsettling. Because now he must live with the distance between who he has been and who sacred intimacy is quietly asking him to become. That distance can create tension, inner pressure, a sense that life is no longer neutral, a sense that choices matter more now, that how he lives matters more now, that he cannot keep saying yes in his soul and no in his life without feeling the fracture of it. That is why sacred intimacy often creates a deeper moral and spiritual seriousness in him. He may not call it that, but he feels it. He feels that something meaningful happened, that something true was revealed, that he is being asked in some quiet and relentless way, not just to feel more, but to become more aligned with what he now knows. That is the deeper truth of Chapter 7. Sacred intimacy reveals that he cannot go back unchanged. Once it touches the divine masculine deeply enough, ordinary connection begins to feel thinner, old roles begin to feel heavier, and the inner life begins shifting in ways he may not yet know how to express. He becomes more reflective, more aware, more inwardly altered by what he has felt. The old life does not fit as easily, because the soul has now tasted something real. And once that happens, he may resist the transformation, fear it, delay it, or move through it in silence, but he cannot fully return to who he was before. Because sacred intimacy does not just touch the heart. It changes the standard by which the heart now lives. And once the standard changes, the man is already on a different path. Even if no one else can see it yet. Even if he cannot fully name it yet. Even if the outer life has not caught up. Inside, something has already turned. And that turning is sacred. Because it means the soul has remembered that it was made for more than protection, more than performance, more than survival. It was made for truth. And once sacred intimacy reveals that truth, the divine masculine can never be entirely the same again. Chapter 8. It reveals the collapse of performance. One of the clearest things sacred intimacy reveals in the divine masculine is this. What used to work no longer works. The old way of staying strong. The old way of staying calm. The old way of staying desirable without becoming too exposed. The old way of looking stable while feeling divided inside. The old way of giving just enough of himself to remain connected while keeping the deeper self protected. All of it starts to strain. And that is where something profound begins. Sacred intimacy reveals the collapse of performance. Not performance only in the shallow sense. Not just pretending. Not just saying the right thing. Not just playing a role in some obvious way. But performance in the deeper emotional sense. The version of himself he learned to live from in order to be respected, safe, composed, admired, and in control. The version that knows how to present strength more easily than vulnerability. The version that knows how to maintain form even when the inner world is trembling. The version that survives through discipline, image, restraint, and emotional management. That version may have carried him for years, maybe decades, and it may have served an important purpose. But sacred intimacy begins exposing its limits. That is why this chapter matters so much. Because sacred intimacy does not merely comfort the divine masculine. It confronts him with the possibility that the identity he trusted most may no longer be enough for the truth now awakening inside him. A man can move through much of life being rewarded for performance. He learns how to appear grounded, how to speak with certainty, how to regulate emotion in public, how to remain reliable under pressure, how to stay attractive by staying slightly guarded, how to offer enough tenderness to connect while still protecting the deeper self. These things can look like maturity. Sometimes they are maturity in part. But often, mixed in with genuine strength, there is also adaptation. Adaptation to a world that valued composure more than vulnerability. Adaptation to environments where feeling too much was not safe. Adaptation to the belief that to be masculine was to be controlled, not transparent. So performance becomes not only social. It becomes personal. It becomes how he stays together. That is why sacred intimacy can feel so destabilizing. Because sacred intimacy does not only admire his form. It asks what is beneath it. It does not only respond to his strength. It reaches the tenderness underneath the strength. It does not only notice his calm. It senses what the calm may be containing. It does not only love the role. It begins to call forth the man beneath the role. And once that begins, performance starts collapsing. Because performance can survive many things. It can survive attraction. It can survive admiration. It can survive surface-level connection. It can survive ordinary relationships built on routine, compatibility, projection, or emotional habit. But sacred intimacy is different. Sacred intimacy makes him feel the difference between looking strong and being whole, between seeming calm and actually being at peace, between appearing emotionally stable and being truly emotionally honest, between being desired for the image and being known in the soul. That difference is impossible to unfeel once he feels it. And because he feels it, the old self starts becoming uncomfortable to live inside. He may still know how to perform, still know how to carry himself, still know how to remain measured, still know how to hide behind silence, steadiness, or charm. But now something in him can feel that these things are no longer enough. Not enough to hold the connection. Not enough to hold what he feels. Not enough to hold the truth sacred intimacy has awakened. That is what collapse feels like at first. Not necessarily dramatic destruction, but insufficiency. The quiet realization that the old way cannot fully carry the new depth. This can be deeply unsettling for him. Because if performance has become identity, then the collapse of performance can feel like the collapse of self. He may ask, even if not in words, if I am not the composed one, then who am I? If I am not the one in control, then who am I? If I cannot rely on my usual distance, my usual image, my usual emotional restraint, then what holds me together now? These are not small questions. They are threshold questions. And sacred intimacy is often what brings a man to them. Imagine a man who has spent years looking stable. He knows how to be respected. He knows how to stay unreadable enough to feel safe. He knows how to maintain the masculine form the world responds well to. Then one day, sacred intimacy reaches him. Not with drama, but with truth, with presence, with emotional contact that goes beyond role. Now his usual ways of holding himself begin to feel thinner. He notices that saying the right thing is not enough. That looking strong is not enough. That maintaining control is not enough. That remaining slightly distant is not enough. Because the connection is asking for something his role cannot supply. Realness. That is why performance begins to collapse. Sacred intimacy does not care how polished the mask is if the soul is still hidden behind it. It does not care how impressive he appears if the deeper self remains absent. It does not care how stable he looks if that stability is built on emotional self-erasure. It asks for embodiment. And embodiment is where many men feel most unprepared. A man may know how to perform calm. He may not yet know how to stay emotionally present in vulnerability. He may know how to perform confidence. He may not yet know how to live openly with tenderness. He may know how to perform devotion in moments. He may not yet know how to embody devotion as truth. That gap can create enormous inner discomfort. Because now he can feel the difference between the image and the reality. He can feel when he is performing. Feel when he is hiding. Feel when the role is speaking louder than the soul. Feel when his words are behind what his heart already knows. And once that awareness begins, performance loses its innocence. He may still use it, still retreat into it, still rely on it when the emotional intensity becomes too much. But he now knows it is there. He knows it is not the whole truth. And that is a painful realization. Because performance may have protected him from shame, from chaos, from feeling too much, from being seen too clearly before he was ready. But now he begins to see that it also kept him separated from the deeper love he longs for. It kept him admired, perhaps, but not fully met. It kept him composed, perhaps, but not fully alive. It kept him intact, perhaps, but not fully free. That is the cost sacred intimacy reveals. And when a man feels that cost, performance can start feeling heavy, exhausting, lonely. He may begin to notice how tiring it is to maintain the image, how much energy it takes to remain in role, how often he edits his truth to stay safe, how often he suppresses what is real in order to keep appearing strong, how much of his life has been lived through emotional choreography rather than genuine presence. These realizations are not comfortable. In fact, they can feel humiliating at first. Not because emotional truth is humiliating, but because the ego does not like being exposed as limited. The ego likes performance because performance can be controlled. Sacred intimacy disrupts control. It says without words, I am not asking for your best image. I am asking for your actual self. That demand can make him feel stripped. Stripped of certainty. Stripped of the ease of knowing how to be. Stripped of the old script that once helped him navigate closeness without becoming too vulnerable. This is why sacred intimacy often makes the divine masculine more inward before it makes him more free. Because he has to feel the collapse before he can live the truth beyond it. And the collapse does not always look graceful. It may look like silence, like confusion, like emotional contradiction, like the old self trying to reassert control while the deeper self is already moving elsewhere. That is not necessarily regression. Sometimes it is deconstruction. The old structure is weakening before the new one is stable. The role is losing power before truth has fully taken form in his life. This in-between stage can feel raw. He may no longer feel at home in performance, but still feel afraid of life without it. He may no longer want to live behind the mask, but still not know how to stand fully without it. He may recognize that sacred intimacy is asking for more realness, but still lack the emotional integration to embody that realness consistently. That is why this stage often comes with grief. Grief for how long he lived in role. Grief for how much of himself he kept hidden. Grief for the younger self who learned performance before truth. Grief for the connections where he remained partially absent because he did not know another way. But this grief is holy, because it marks the beginning of something true. The death of false strength. The death of emotional impersonation. The death of a masculinity built only on control. And from that death, something deeper can emerge. A masculinity that is not only admired, but inhabited. Not only composed, but conscious. Not only structured, but alive. Not only strong in image, but strong enough to stay truthful in intimacy. That is what sacred intimacy ultimately reveals here. It reveals that performance has reached its limit. That the role cannot carry the soul forever. That image is too small for truth. That the old ways of being may have helped him survive, but they cannot help him fully live. That is the deeper truth of Chapter 8. Sacred intimacy reveals the collapse of performance by showing the divine masculine that charm, control, distance, composure, and emotional management are no longer enough. It exposes the gap between the role he has learned to inhabit and the truth now awakening underneath it. It makes the old identity feel thinner, heavier, and more exhausting to maintain. It does not come to shame him for performing. It comes to show him that the soul wants more than performance can ever provide. It wants embodiment. It wants honesty. It wants a masculinity no longer built around hiding, but around presence. And once he feels that, even if the process is messy, even if he resists it, even if he grows quiet beneath the weight of it, something in him already knows. The old mask cannot carry what sacred intimacy has now revealed. Chapter 9. It reveals the man he is being called to become. One of the most beautiful and painful things sacred intimacy reveals in the divine masculine is not only who he has been. It reveals who he is being called to become. And that is why sacred intimacy can feel so overwhelming. Because it does not simply expose his wounds, his fear, his armor, or the cost of his defenses. It also shows him a possibility, a future self, a deeper masculinity that has always existed in seed form beneath the survival patterns, waiting for the right kind of truth to call it forward. That is what makes this stage so sacred. Sacred intimacy does not only reveal what is broken, it reveals what is possible. And sometimes possibility is just as destabilizing as pain. A man may be able to live with his old wounds for a very long time. He may adapt to them, organize around them, build an identity that keeps them manageable. He may call that identity strength. He may call it maturity, discipline, emotional control, practicality, independence. He may learn to function so well inside that structure that he hardly notices how much of himself has never been fully lived. Then sacred intimacy enters. And suddenly, he is not only confronted with what hurts. He is confronted with what could heal. not in a superficial sense, not in the fantasy that another person will save him, but in the deeper and more honest sense that this connection reveals a version of himself that feels more whole, more truthful, more integrated, more alive than the one he has been surviving through. This can be hard to explain, because the man he is being called to become is not always visible in the outer story right away. Sometimes he only glimpses it, in a moment where he is more honest than usual, in a silence where he feels more real than he knows how to say, in the strange humility of realizing that he wants to be emotionally present, not just emotionally in control, in the ache of recognizing that the life he built around armor is no longer enough for the soul now waking up inside him. These moments matter, because they are not random. They are revelations of direction. Sacred intimacy begins showing him that there is a deeper masculinity available to him. A masculinity that is not built only on control, but on consciousness. Not built only on strength in the outer sense, but on the courage to stay present with emotional truth. Not built only on role, but on essence. Not built only on appearing grounded, but on becoming inwardly congruent. That is the man he is being called to become. And the reason this can feel so intense is that once he senses that deeper self, he also feels the distance between where he is and where his soul is pointing. That distance can create grief. Because to see what is possible in yourself is beautiful. But to realize how much of that possibility has not yet been embodied can ache deeply. He may begin sensing that he does not want to keep living from performance alone. He does not want to keep using distance as his primary safety. He does not want to keep calling silence peace if the silence is really fear. He does not want to keep splitting himself between what he feels and how he lives. And yet, wanting to become a deeper man and knowing how to become him are not the same thing. That is where the sacred pressure begins. Because sacred intimacy does not let him remain neutral anymore. It does not just show him his current self. It shows him the gap between the armored man and the awakened man, between the controlled man and the conscious man, between the man who survives love through protection and the man who could one day live love through truth. That gap is not there to shame him. It is there to invite him. An invitation can be powerful. A man may spend years changing only when pain forces him to. But sacred intimacy can call change forth through beauty, through truth, through the experience of being deeply met. It can make him want more of himself, not because he was condemned, but because he was revealed. That is a very different kind of transformation. It is not built on punishment. It is built on recognition. Recognition that there is more in him than his current life is allowing. Recognition that tenderness is not weakness. Recognition that emotional honesty is not the opposite of masculinity, but one of its most mature forms. Recognition that the truest version of strength may not be the man who never needs, never softens, never trembles, never changes. It may be the man who can remain present once sacred love has touched him deeply enough to undo the old illusion. This is why sacred intimacy often carries a spiritual feeling to it. Not because it is always mystical in language, but because it reveals more than emotion. It reveals purpose. It reveals direction. It reveals that the connection is not only here to be felt, but to initiate something. A becoming. A reorientation. A quieter but deeper movement toward integrity. He may not tell anyone this is happening. He may not even admit it clearly to himself at first. But he may start feeling the call in subtle ways. A growing discomfort with old patterns. A loss of appetite for shallow connection. A strange emotional seriousness that follows him after moments of real intimacy. A sense that he cannot keep pretending certain truths are not true. A deep inner awareness that the man he has been is not the final man he could become. That awareness can humble him. Because sacred intimacy often reveals not only his higher possibility, but how much courage that possibility will require. To become the deeper man, he may have to let go of admired versions of himself. The version who always looks composed. The version who always has control. The version who never seems too affected. The version who remains emotionally unreadable and therefore safe. He may have to release certain inherited ideas of masculinity. Ideas that told him vulnerability is weakness. That emotional need is dangerous. That closeness reduces freedom. That tenderness must be hidden to remain powerful. Sacred intimacy begins showing him another possibility entirely. That real masculinity may be more expansive than that. More conscious. More relational. More truthful. More grounded in soul than in image. This can feel like a revelation of destiny. Again, not destiny in the sense of a scripted romantic fantasy, but destiny in the sense that he begins to feel what his soul is asking of him. Who are you becoming now that this truth has found you? That is the sacred question, and it can follow him everywhere. Into his work, into his silence, into his memories, into the discomfort of old habits, into the moments when he realizes he no longer wants to be the man who always retreats when something matters. This is what makes Chapter 9 so important. Because many people think sacred intimacy only reveals the pain. But if it only revealed pain, it would not feel sacred. What makes it sacred is that it reveals pain and possibility at the same time. It shows him the wound. And it shows him the deeper self beyond the wound. It shows him the armor. And it shows him the man who would no longer need to live entirely behind it. It shows him the fear. And it shows him the courage latent underneath the fear. It shows him the old identity. And it shows him the truer identity waiting underneath it. That double revelation is powerful. Because once a man sees who he is being called to become, he can no longer remain fully loyal to the smaller self without feeling the cost. He may still delay, still resist, still struggle, still move in circles for a time. But now the circles hurt more. Why? Because he has seen beyond them. He has felt beyond them. He has tasted, however briefly, the kind of masculinity that could live in greater truth. A masculinity that could be emotionally present without collapsing. Devoted without losing itself. Tender without becoming weak. Honest without losing dignity. Grounded enough to love without hiding. Once he feels that possibility, something in him begins orienting toward it, even if slowly. That orientation matters. Because it means sacred intimacy is no longer just an emotional experience. It has become formative. It is shaping what he respects, what he longs for, what he can tolerate, what he can no longer pretend is enough. That is what it means for sacred intimacy to reveal the man he is being called to become. It shows him that his future self is not built from more performance. It is built from more truth. Not from pretending to be untouched, but from learning how to remain open without abandoning himself. Not from seeming strong, but from becoming inwardly aligned. Not from maintaining the old mask, but from outgrowing the need for it. That is the deeper truth of Chapter 9. Sacred intimacy reveals the man he is being called to become by showing the divine masculine not only his wounds, but his higher possibility. It reveals a deeper masculinity, more conscious, more honest, more present, more integrated, waiting beneath the defenses he has lived inside for so long. It shows him that he is capable of more truth, more tenderness, more emotional courage, and more wholeness than his old identity allowed. And once he sees that possibility, even if it scares him, even if he resists it, even if he is not yet ready to embody it fully, he cannot fully return to the smaller version of himself without feeling that something sacred is asking more of him now. Because sacred intimacy does not only uncover who he has been, it also whispers, with undeniable force, you were made for more than survival. You were made for truth. You were made to become. Chapter 10. What sacred intimacy is ultimately doing. In the end, sacred intimacy is not only revealing how the divine masculine loves. It is revealing who he really is beneath everything that taught him to hide. That is the deepest truth beneath this entire journey. Sacred intimacy is not just about closeness, not just about romance, not just about emotional intensity, not just about being seen, feeling safe, or being shaken by truth. It is about revelation. It is about what happens when a man can no longer remain fully hidden from himself. That is why sacred intimacy affects him so deeply. Because it does not merely bring another person near him. It brings his own soul near enough to be felt. And once that happens, everything begins to change. Sacred intimacy reveals the man beneath the mask. It reveals the longing beneath the strength. It reveals the wounds beneath the control. It reveals the cost of the armor. It reveals the split between love and fear. It reveals the life he has been living in survival, and the life his soul has been quietly waiting to live in truth. That is what makes it sacred. Because sacred intimacy does not flatter the false self. It uncovers the real one. A man can live for many years inside roles that function well enough. He can be respected, desired, needed, admired, trusted, and still remain partially hidden from his own inner life. He can call himself strong while quietly carrying loneliness. He can call himself calm while silently living in tension. He can call himself independent while burying the deeper need to be emotionally met. He can call himself fine while whole layers of his heart remain untouched. Then sacred intimacy enters. And it changes the standard. Now he has felt what it is like to be seen beneath the role. To be emotionally recognized beneath the image. To feel his wounds exposed, his tenderness stirred, his soul reflected. His future self hinted at through one real connection. And once he feels that, he cannot fully go back. Not because sacred intimacy forces him into instant transformation, but because it removes the innocence of the old life. He now knows too much. He knows what it feels like when someone reaches beneath the armor. He knows what it feels like when truth touches him more deeply than attraction ever did. He knows what it feels like when love is no longer just pleasant, but spiritually consequential. He knows what it feels like when his own soul becomes visible to him. That visibility is irreversible. He may still resist it, still retreat, still delay, still move through confusion, contradiction, silence, and grief. But underneath all of that, something has already happened. Something in him has been awakened. And awakened things do not go back to sleep easily. This is what sacred intimacy is ultimately doing to the divine masculine. It is exposing the life beneath the adaptation. It is showing him that his old strength was never the whole story. That his old self-protection came with a cost. That his longing to be known is real. That his fear of closeness is real. That his tenderness is real. That his wounds are real. That his potential is real. And perhaps most importantly, it is showing him that he is not meant to remain only the man who learned to survive. He is being called to become the man who can live in truth. That is the real revelation. Sacred intimacy does not come into his life merely to stir his emotions. It comes to uncover the difference between survival and wholeness. Survival says, stay guarded. Wholeness says, become real. Survival says, hide the deeper self. Wholeness says, let the deeper self live. Survival says, control everything you can. Wholeness says, truth cannot be fully controlled. It can only be embodied. That is why sacred intimacy often feels so difficult. Because it is not only exposing what hurts. It is exposing what has to change. It is showing him that the old way of being, the role, the armor, the performance, the emotional distance, the silence, the carefully managed self, can no longer fully carry what his soul now knows. And that realization can break a man open. Not to ruin him, to reveal him. This is where the spiritual layer becomes undeniable. Because sacred intimacy does not only reveal pain. It reveals calling. It reveals the man he has been. And the man he is being asked to become. It reveals where he is still ruled by fear. And where he is already capable of deeper courage. It reveals the younger self still protecting wounds. And the emerging self ready to live with more consciousness, more honesty, and more emotional integrity. That is why sacred intimacy is not just emotional. It is initiatory. It initiates him into self-recognition. Into the realization that beneath the structure, beneath the masculine presentation, beneath the life that looked controlled from the outside, there is still a living soul asking for truth. And once that soul is touched deeply enough, his old life begins to feel smaller. Not necessarily wrong, but smaller. Less alive. Less enough. Less able to satisfy the deeper hunger now waking inside him. This is why sacred intimacy can leave him quieter after the fact. More reflective. More serious. more inwardly changed than anyone else may immediately understand. Because sacred intimacy is still working in him. It works in memory, in silence, in contrast, in the ache of returning to old patterns and feeling their emptiness more clearly, in the moments when he realizes he cannot fully pretend anymore, in the moments when his soul whispers that there is more available than a life built around defense. That whisper is sacred, and over time it becomes a choice. Will he keep serving the mask? Or will he begin honoring the man beneath it? Will he keep living from fear? Or will he slowly let truth become stronger than fear? Will he keep returning to protection? Or will he learn how to build enough inner safety to stay present in what is real? Those are the questions sacred intimacy leaves behind. Not because it wants to torment him, but because it wants to awaken him. And awakening is never only about feeling more. It is about becoming more honest with what those feelings reveal. That is why the deepest purpose of sacred intimacy is not romance alone. It is revelation. It is the unveiling of the soul, the unveiling of the hidden self, the unveiling of the cost of living half-known, the unveiling of the possibility of a deeper masculinity, one built not only on strength, but on truth, tenderness, and conscious presence. That is what sacred intimacy is ultimately doing. It is not destroying the divine masculine. It is uncovering the man beneath everything that taught him to be less than fully alive. And once that uncovering begins, even if slowly, even if painfully, even if in silence, his journey is no longer the same. Because now he knows. He knows what he has hidden. He knows what he longs for. He knows what still hurts. He knows what is possible. He knows that beneath the armor, the soul is still there. And once a man truly knows that, he can never again fully belong to the old illusion that he is only the mask. So if this message found you today, remember this. Sacred intimacy does not enter a man's life to shame him for being guarded. It enters to reveal how much love still lives beneath the guard. It does not come to destroy his masculinity. It comes to refine it. It does not come to expose his wounds so he can suffer more. It comes to expose them so he can stop building his life around them. And if sacred intimacy has touched him, even if he does not yet know how to hold it, even if the process looks messy, even if it moves through silence and fear before it becomes clarity, something real has already begun. Because what the soul truly recognizes, it does not forget. And what sacred intimacy truly awakens cannot remain buried forever. If this video spoke to you, share in the comments. What do you think sacred intimacy reveals most strongly in the divine masculine? His wounds, his longing, his fear, or his highest self? And if you want more deep videos on divine masculine energy, sacred love, emotional healing, and soul connection, subscribe and stay with me for the next one.
Thank you for spending this moment with me. If this message resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe and continue this journey with us here on Twin Flame Journey. And always remember, what is meant for your soul will always find its way back to you. Until next time, beautiful soul, trust the journey.